Hi, I'm Dave Bundy, editor of the Lincoln Journal-Star, and we are at an editorial endorsement interview for George Dungan. He is the District 26 legislative candidate. So, George, thanks for being here. Before we get you doing all the talking, we'll have Kent say a couple of words. Kent.
Yeah, I'm Kent Walgamot. I cover arts and entertainment, and I've been on the editorial board for more than a decade.
All right. With that, again, George, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The first question is a chance for you to introduce yourself to voters, and not that you didn't get to do that already in the spring, but tell us, the legislature from time to time has not looked like a fun place to work, but you're going out of your way to want to. And so why do you want to be a state senator? And then what experiences and attributes particularly suit you for this position?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And, frankly, it's one that we've, had to answer, I think, as candidates every time you knock on a door or talk to a voter for the last year and a half. So I appreciate an opportunity to kind of summarize that. I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. First of all, again, thank you both and to the rest of the editorial board for having me here. This is a great opportunity to talk about the issues and make sure people can kind of be educated about where we stand on those issues before they vote. So I very much appreciate this opportunity. So a number of reasons that I'm running for office, but I think one of the biggest ones, and one that is present in all the conversations I have, is that, to put it frankly, I'm really sick of the fact that at our legislature over the past few years, I think we've seen it get more and more partisan, and we've seen less and less actually happen with regards to passing bills and passing legislation that actually helps people. I consider myself somebody who definitely tries to build bridges, tries to work together with other folks in coalitions, because I think when you look at the unique nature of our unicameral, and when you look at the purpose for which we're going to the Capitol to help out at the legislature and to serve, it really is to do our best to represent everybody and to come together on issues. So I consider myself someone who is willing to work with other folks pretty much no matter who they are, work across the aisle and try to get things done. And so because of that, that's part of why I want to go to the Capitol, is I think I have that particular skill set. My job up until relatively recently was that I was a public defender. I worked at the public defender's office for about 8.5 years. And in that role, among the many things that I learned along the way is you have to have a unique skill set that really allows you to work with pretty much everybody. In my job as a public defender, you're interacting with clients, you're interacting with county attorneys, you're interacting with law enforcement, you're interacting with judges and juries. And in that, I think you really do have to do everything you can to sort of bring people together in a way to help, oftentimes reach common sense solutions to problems and kind of get everybody where they needs to go. So I do think that my time in that office, as well as just sort of the things that I've picked up along the way, help make me somebody who would be well situated and well suited to help build those bridges and build those coalitions to bring people together to get things done. So that's a major part of why I'm running.
All right. Well, you offer a perfect segue to the next question. So
good.
This is at times this feels like a divided state, a divided community. You would go into office certainly with some, you're not a blank political slate. You believe certain things. How do you listen to, represent, help people who disagree with you?
That's a really good question. And honestly, I was actually talking about that with somebody at their door yesterday when I was out knocking doors. Kind of like I alluded to in the first question there, and also talked about a little bit with regards to coalition building. I think that if you get elected as a state senator, you're the legislator for your district, which includes the people who voted for you and the people who didn't. And I think it's your job and frankly, your responsibility to be the best representative you can be with those people. I think that when you're out talking to folks, whether it's voters or then constituents, once you're elected, one of the number one things that I try to do is ask them, what are the important issues to you? And in doing so, I almost across the board have always found there's something we can agree on. I know that a lot of people have different issues that they focus on at the ballot box. A lot of people have different issues that they vote based on. But at the end of the day, I actually think there's more that we can agree on than not. And I think that on all ends of the spectrum, we see people kind of running to these extremes in such a way that they're isolating people. But I have found in the last year and a half that I've been out knocking doors, you can find common ground with people. And I think that that's crucial as a legislator. So, I think it's important to try to find that common ground, find the issues we agree on. And I think the best way to do that is to listen. People want to feel heard. All of us want to be heard on a regular basis. And so when you ask people what's important to them, don't just do it as a tool to, get to your talking points. Do it to actually listen to what they say. And at the end of the day, if they say things that you agree with, you're going to find that common ground. So I think that's crucial to working with people across the aisle with different political spectrums.
All right. So immigration is largely a federal issue, but that doesn't stop legislators from talking about it quite a bit. With the tools that are available to state government, what would be your priorities? What would be your solutions? What are things that the state ought to be working on as far as immigration?
Well, I think, kind of like you said in the question, immigration is a much more federal issue. And I know that there's ways that it does affect us here in Nebraska, but at the end of the day, Washington, D.C. makes a lot of those decisions. And as we all know, things don't necessarily get done in Washington, D.C. very quickly or frankly, very well. And so, I think that's where we get a lot of the issues that we have here at the statewide level is D.C. not being able to actually come together and get anything done. I do think we'd have to defer to DC on a number of things, or federal level rather, when it comes to immigration. I will tell you that in the number of conversations I've had with agricultural groups throughout the time that I've been on the campaign trail, whether it's talking to Farm Bureau or talking to other organizations that represent, our agricultural folks here in Nebraska, they talk all the time about how, we hear about this labor shortage that we as a whole country have had for the last year or two, but there's been a labor shortage for agriculture for decades, a decade or longer. And so, one of the things that I think we can all work together on is trying to find ways to make our state more friendly towards people who have come here, to Nebraska looking for these jobs, trying to find ways to make sure that the visa process is more accessible and easy, and make sure that we make our state an attractive place for those who have come here legally looking for jobs. And I think it's really important to everybody across the board, whether it's Western, Central, or Eastern Nebraska, that we have welcoming cities and cities that are well equipped to take care of people who have come here looking for the American dream that we always talk about. So I know it's an issue that we want to do some work on. Like I said, it's definitely much more federal, but I'll always make sure that we have a welcoming state to people who come here trying to fulfill those promises.
All right. So there have been accusations of voter fraud that have cast doubt on the election process sort of across the country. So this is a sort of a multi-part question. First of all, what would you do if you were pressured to play a role in overturning an election? And then do you think more protections are needed either on the voter rights side or the security side?
It's a good question. As I alluded to earlier in my introduction, I'm a lawyer. I've spent the last, better part of a decade looking at cases. And one thing I know as an attorney is that evidence matters. All of these claims about voter fraud have been picked over with a fine-tooth comb, and they've been looked at by a number of courts in different states and at the federal level. And one thing that I think has been consistent among those cases is there's not evidence of any kind of widespread voter fraud as has been alleged. I listened to our Secretary of State here, Bob Evnen, and that is when he says that our elections are safe and secure. And so I do believe that our elections here in Nebraska are safe and secure. I think the way they currently operate makes sense. And I trust, people to make sure that they stay safe and secure. It's why we have poll workers who take their job very seriously. If I were pressured to help overturn an election, I would always look at the evidence first and make sure that I'm doing what I believe is right. But I'll stand my ground and make sure that I, stand up for the election system we have in place, especially if the allegations of fraud are based in absolutely nothing.
All right, so on to another contentious issue. Supreme Court has sort of tossed the issue of abortion back into the states. As a lawyer, you may have a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more perspective than a lot of folks. Describe your views on prohibiting or limiting abortion in Nebraska, because the legislature is almost certainly going to end up wrestling with this one.
Yeah, and since the Dobbs opinion came down, this is an issue that I've talked about at the doors on a weekly, daily basis almost. It's definitely on the forefront of, I think, a lot of people's minds. And you're right. I think in the legislature, we're going to have to deal with this. I am pro-choice. I believe that the decision to have an abortion is one that's incredibly personal. It's an incredibly difficult decision, I know, for a number of people. And it's a decision that I think should be made between a woman, a person with a uterus, and their doctor, their family, their faith, their friends, all those things. It's not a decision that I think the government should be making for them. And so, we saw the legislature try to pass this extreme ban that didn't really have many, if any at all, exceptions. And clearly that was not successful. And one thing that I think is incredibly informative, and this kind of loops back to what I was talking about earlier with regards to listening to people, is as I've been out on the campaign trail talking about this with people, I've knocked, thousands of doors. And in those doors, especially recently, we talk about this. And there are a very high number of people that I speak with who say that they personally are pro-life, but that they would not vote for somebody who would try to pass an extreme ban that would take that decision away from an individual. And I think that therein lies the differentiation between what somebody does with their own body and what somebody makes a decision about how they're going to act, and whether or not we as a legislature should be removing that choice or that ability from them. And so, I think it's very informative to listen to people who know way more about this than a bunch of legislators who maybe are making the decision based on politics. And I think we should leave that decision to individuals who have to make those choices. And I trust people to make those decisions with their doctors. So I would not be for the extreme bans that we've been talking about in the legislature over the last year. And I know a number of my constituents wouldn't be for that either.
All right. I could go out on a limb and predict your answer to this one, but I'll ask it anyway. Should the legislature scrap nonpartisanship? And if they should not, what role will you play in preserving it?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily which way you were going to predict, but no, I don't think we should scrap nonpartisanship. I think that
right.
Right. I think that our nonpartisan legislature is what makes our legislature and our entire legislative system here in Nebraska special. We've had it for a long time, and I think it's worked exceptionally well for a number of reasons. But the primary one is that it permits people to actually talk about the issues instead of talking about party and just voting along party lines. Having 49 senators who can get together and talk with each other about the individual bills that come up and the issues without being told how to vote by a majority whip or a minority whip or whatever that would look like, is what gives senators the autonomy to make decisions that best represent their district instead of just going along with some party. And so, we hear a lot from voters how they want to talk about the issues and not vote for people on the party. And that's why they like the nonpartisan legislature too. So I support the legislature staying nonpartisan. I think it keeps us focused on the issues. And it keeps us away from a lot of what we've said, like I said before, in what we've seen in DC and what we see in a lot of other state legislatures where they just vote down party lines and there's no real conversations. So I'm very pro nonpartisanship.
All right. I'm 1 for 1. Yes and answer. All right. Well, George, this is the portion of the meeting where Kent leaps into action.
I see him sitting up there. I see him getting ready to go.
He's got to get into question position.
That's it.
All right.
I'm sure I asked you this in the spring, and I guarantee you I don't remember what your answer was. As you know, most of the work in the legislature gets done in committee. What committees, if you're elected, would you want to try to get on? I know you can't always get what you want, but which ones would you try?
Now you can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. So certainly you end up
You
maybe
gotta
where you're
sing that,
needed.
George. You gotta sing that. Do your best.
Sometimes you end up where you're needed.
Do your best, Rolling
Um,
Stones. All right.
Oh, no, nobody wants that, especially not recorded. We're not gonna
Okay,
we're not gonna
fair
put
enough.
that on the website. Um, I mean, genuinely, like you said, you don't always get to pick where you end up. And so I'm happy to go serve wherever I'm needed and wherever the legislature thinks that my skill set would be helpful. You know, given my background, I do certainly think that of the three that I'd be interested in, you know, judiciary is up there. I think that given my specific niche interest and experience in that, I'd be a helpful person to talk about a number of those issues. And we're going to see, I think, the judiciary be a place where there's going to be some vacancies, and that sort of background is going to be helpful. In addition to that, you know, the other two that I'd probably focus on would be transportation and telecommunications. I think transportation and making sure we have good roads, especially here in Northeast Lincoln, but all across the state, well-funded roads, and also focusing on the rail that's right along the district here. That's important. And I think that broadband and specifically rural broadband is going to be an issue that we're going to continue to see for the next few years here. It's amazing how many different groups I talk to where focusing on access to broadband is one of the highest issue priorities they have. Even groups you wouldn't think about. So transportation and telecommunications is also up there. And then finally, business and labor. You know, I'm a big supporter of organized labor, and I have a lot of friends here in the community in Northeast Lincoln who that affects very directly. And so being a voice on the Business and Labor Committee and being able to talk about those issues as they come up, I think is going to be incredibly important to my constituents if I have a chance to go serve at the legislature. So those would be the three that I'd probably focus on.
Well, you sort of hit on one of the specific sort of issue questions I have, and that is, what is your thought on building a new prison and all the issues that are tied up into that? Do you think we need one, or how do we address that problem?
Yeah, I mean, this is one that definitely hits home to me, just given a lot of my work in the criminal justice system. And it's one that I feel like I have some specific insight into. You know, one thing that I think we can all agree on across the board when you start looking at the foundation of this conversation is that we have a problem with prison overcrowding. We know that exists. We see that exist. It's statistical, it's numbers. You can't argue that. And so the question then becomes, what do we do to fix it? You know, I don't think this is a problem that we can just build our way out of. I understand that the state pen, NSP down here in Lincoln, has problems, right? It's an old building and there's a lot of issues with it. I get that. And I understand that reality, but I also don't think the key is just building a new prison and assuming that's going to be the answer. You know, what I think is going to be important moving forward is that we have these discussions about what's going on in our prisons with all of the stakeholders involved, and stop, you know, just slinging mud back and forth and not actually getting anything done. I'm very proud to have the endorsement of the Omaha Police Officers Association. You know, I have gone to them and we've talked about the fact that these are all issues, you know, that I think we're all going to have to sit down at the table about and work on them together. You know, I also think getting stakeholders, whether it's county attorneys, police officers, judges, the probation office, the court system, everybody together to talk about what we can do to make this problem better. I know that was addressed in the last legislative session. I know there was work done on that. There were studies that were done, and I think it's a conversation that needs to continue, and we need to have that conversation. But you know, we need to do it in a way that actually results in a reduction in overcrowding. And so I'm happy to be a part of that conversation and very eager to continue that conversation at the legislature.
Dave will know this is coming. I always ask
Water.
about water. What's your opinion on the two big water projects that were sort of semi-approved last year? The canal from Colorado and the big lake, so to speak, up by Ashland.
Yeah. So I think when we last talked about those, they were just being debated. And so now we've gotten a little more information about them, and we've had a chance to kind of see, I think, what the plan is. You know, neither one of those obviously directly impact Lincoln or Northeast Lincoln Immensely. I think if we separate them out a little bit and talk about them separately, the lake project up in the Gretna area, I'm for better, more water recreation areas. I think that sounds very nice. I think it'd be good for the community. My questions about it would be, how are we going to fund it? How much is it going to cost? And so I just would want to look at that in a little bit more detail. But generally, I think that, more water recreations or areas are positive. I would want to make sure that if we're using public dollars for that kind of project, that we're going to make sure that the public has access to it. And so ensuring that there's actual open public green space or access to that lake, more so than private, I think is going to be important for making sure that people in Nebraska feel like they're getting a bang for their buck and they can actually go use that lake. So that's going to be, I think, important up there. As it pertains to the canal, I think that it's always important to be forward thinking when it comes to water preservation. We all need access to water. We need access to clean water, clean air. And so I think it's important to be forward thinking with that. I don't know all the details of that project. Obviously, I've not worked on that. So I'd be curious to see, again, kind of what the plans are and how that's going to evolve over time. But what it makes me think of, I think a little bit more in the near future for us, is how here in Northeast Lincoln, and Lincoln in particular, there's water projects we need as well. We saw the issue with water previously, and that we need better access to water during emergency situations here in Lincoln. And so it makes me say, well, if we can do that, then we can also focus on having a little bit more access to water and the projects that we've been working on or thinking about here in Lincoln. And so finding ways to do some studies, assess the cost of that, I think that's what I'd be a little bit more interested in, just given the fact that that more directly affects the constituents here in LD 26. But as it goes to the other projects, I'm not necessarily opposed to them. I just have a lot of questions.
I thought you might favor the canal, because it looks to me like that's a lawyer's employment act coming.
Right. Job security is never a bad thing, but I'm staying out of that one.
The last one that I have is the issue of property tax is always the big issue, and the legislature tries to address it through various means. But what's your thought on, quote, property tax relief, or changing the tax system, or however to alleviate that to some measure?
Yeah, we hear about it every day, right? Whether it's me or volunteers or folks out knocking doors, when I ask what's the most important issue to you, property tax comes up on a very consistent basis. I agree, property taxes are too high, and we need to do what we can to reduce that. I think that that's kind of a multifaceted solution or answer here, I think. And if there was a silver bullet solution, I imagine they would have already done it. So it's probably going to be pretty complicated, but I do think that one way we can look at reducing property taxes is what people always talk about with regards to adjusting state aid to schools, adjusting that TIOSA formula and reworking that in such a way that the state pays more of its fair share towards schools, which would alleviate the tax burden on the property taxpayer, right? I think that would permit us to actually lower our property taxes to a place where people would maybe be a little bit more comfortable with that, while still making sure that our schools are well funded, that they can open on time, they have access to books, because we want to make sure we prioritize that as well. We can't just abandon our schools in the name of property tax, but we absolutely need to reduce property tax overall. I think another answer to that is there were these efforts made with regards to tax reduction over the last session. And in my opinion, some of those were really, really good. And other parts of it I was not necessarily in favor of. And I think that moving forward, we need to do everything we can to focus tax relief on the middle class, and to make sure that lower middle class and middle class folks actually get the benefit of tax relief, instead of just the wealthy, and specifically the corporations that aren't even domiciled in Nebraska necessarily. I know they have a lot of interest in not paying as many taxes, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, I think people need to pay their fair share to make sure that middle class folks, regular folks in the community, aren't shouldering the burden then on behalf of other people. And so, I am committed to continuing to work on tax relief, because it's, again, important to the constituents, it's important to people in the community, but we have to do it responsibly, and we have to do it in a way that doesn't impact our schools negatively or the rest of our community, because we do have a responsibility to provide services for folks in our neighborhood.
All right, well, we are, George, at our last question, and the last question is, what have we not asked you that you would have liked us to ask?
You guys covered it pretty well. We've talked about pretty much everything.
You can use, this can be your stump speech then, whatever you like.
Well, I will say the one thing that we haven't talked about, I think explicitly, that I'll just touch on real quick, and I kind of talked about it a little bit with property tax, our schools. I am a huge supporter of our school system here in Lincoln. I'm a byproduct of LPS. I was born and raised here in Lincoln. I think we have exceptional schools. And we have exceptional teachers, and we have a really good school system. And frankly, statewide, we have really, really, really good schools. And I want to make sure that we continue to do everything we can to support our school system, be an advocate for the school system. And I want to make sure that our public dollars continue to go towards public schools. I have concerns that over the next few legislative sessions, we're going to start seeing more and more attacks on public education. And, I think public education is the building block of everything else that we go off of here in society. And so I want to make sure people know that I will fight for, good quality schools and for good quality education in your neighborhood. And it's something that I think we need to prioritize in the legislature moving forward. So that's probably the only thing we didn't touch on too much, but I think it's just important to mention. Otherwise, if anybody has any other questions, they can go to georgefornebraska.com, all one word, all spelled out. We have more issues on there that are important. Contact information if you want to reach out and ask me any questions. I answer those pretty much every day. And if you're interested in getting involved in the campaign here in the final stretch, feel free to reach out.
Oh, you're the first person to use it as a commercial right there at the end. Creative.
Hey, got to use the opportunity.
All right. Well, George, thank you very much for your time today. We wish you the best with your campaign, and we will see you later.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, George.
Thanks.
Yep. Have a good day.
You too.